Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Powerful Women Rising podcast. Today's interview is Caroline Guntur. I am obsessed with this song right now called Caroline, and I really want to sing it for you, but I'm not going to because it's not actually a song, it's a rap, and it will be terrible. But there's this part where she's like, Caroline, and I really wanted to say that really, really badly. So there you go. Today, we are talking about your relationship with reflection routines. And to be honest, I had an idea of what that meant using context clues, but this interview far exceeded my expectations. It was really, really interesting to talk about some small ways that we can incorporate reflection and evaluation, or whatever you want to call it, into our routines, and how that will make us more productive, how that will decrease procrastination and overwhelm and chaos, and how you can do this on both a micro and a macro level. So I mentioned last week in the introduction to our interview with Lisa Fisher that was about your relationship with chaos, that this episode was a really good complement to that. So if you haven't listened to that one, definitely listen to that one too. But anyway, here we go. My interview with Caroline. I wanted to say it again. Caroline is also known as the Swedish organizer. She is an organizing and productivity coach who helps creatives and entrepreneurs get their digital ducks in a row and become more productive, so there's more time for exploration and play. She is a Golden Circle member of NAPO, which is the National Association of Productivity and Organizing Professionals, a certified photo organizer, and a specialist in digital asset management. So super experienced, super smart, and just a lovely human. I am super excited to share. I just said super so many times in a row because Caroline is super, and so are you. And so is this interview. Okay, I'm going to stop talking. Here we go. Hello, Caroline. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, me too. Excited to talk to you today about reflection routines. It's very fitting as of the recording of this podcast, at least. It's the beginning of the new year. So good time to talk about reflections. But I think when this podcast actually comes out, it will be closer to the end of first quarter, which is also a great time for reflections. So
there's never a bad time for reflections.
That's true. That's true. That's one of the things I was thinking when I was preparing for your interview was like, I think something that most people don't think about is like, it's kind of like New Year's resolutions. Like we don't have to just do them at the beginning of the year, right? Like you can decide on some random Tuesday to do some reflecting.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So before we dig into that, tell everybody a little bit about you.
Yeah. So I'm Caroline. For those who don't know me, I'm known as the Swedish organizer. I was born and raised in Sweden, but now I split my time. I've been in the US for close to 20 years. Time flies. And I am an organizing and productivity coach. So I help people get more done efficiently, finish what they start, wrap up, their goals, accomplish a lot more, and not feel stressed, while doing it, not pull your hair out, basically do it in a way that's fun and easy and just nourishing and wholesome and fun.
It doesn't involve 94 cups of coffee a day.
Exactly. You can have some coffee, just not that
much. Just not let it be your driving force for productivity.
Exactly.
How about that?
That can't be the only fuel. Exactly.
It's so funny. Every time I interview someone and they're talking about what they do or how they help people or whatever, there's always a moment in the interview where I'm like, oh, I think I need to hire her.
Yeah. There's productivity is so much fun, and it's not about, doing as many things as fast as possible. It's about doing the right things with enough space that you still have time to do whatever else you want and focus what's important and feel, happy and live the way you want in the meantime as well. None of us should be stressed or frustrated. Things should be easy and seamless. So that's what I like to help people with. Just live and be able to have breathing space at the same time.
For sure. And I think
Mhm.
reflection, I mean, I'm sure we'll get into this, but reflection is a huge part of that. Like
Huge.
my husband and I both have the same time blindness problem, but I like to think he's worse than me. And he will like spend all day effing around on something. And then at like 5 o'clock, he's like, "Oh, I'm so stressed. I have so much to do. I've been working all day and I haven't gotten anything done and blah, blah, blah." And I always am like, "Babe, let's look at your screen time."
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. Well, that's the thing, right? We all have 24 hours in the day. So how do you choose to spend them and what priorities do you have and how do you tackle things you don't want to do, especially like because there's all things that we don't want to do. Like I don't want to do a lot of laundry and dishes and things like that, but they got to get done. So, how do we tackle everyday things that we sometimes have to do? How do we tackle things at work that we might not want to do or yeah, there's a lot there, right? And it's figuring out how to best go about it.
Yeah, especially when there's
Yeah.
not a one size fits all model. That's something I had to
Hmm.
learn too, was like,
Yeah.
quit trying to force yourself to be productive in the way that Sally on Instagram says you have to be productive because, like, I don't care what I do, how hard I try, what routines I follow, I'm never going to be
Yeah.
a morning person. So
Yeah.
let's just adjust for that and be fine
Hmm.
with the fact that the day starts at 9 a.m.
You can still get a ton of stuff done.
Totally, totally.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's dig into this idea of your relationship with reflection routines. Tell
Hmm.
us a little bit about what a reflection routine actually is.
Yeah, a reflection routine is where you basically have a system in place, a routine in place for regularly looking at what you're doing and if it's working, why you're choosing to do that way, and how you want to maybe change things, if at all, going forward, right? So I normally tell people to have a set few questions that they ask themselves on a regular basis, and those questions will be tailored to the person based on what the goals are, right? And so, you know, people say, well, how often do you have to do this? I actually do it once a week. And that's how I do it. But obviously, I've been doing it for a long time, so I'm pretty good at it. You can start once a year. You can start, like you said, it doesn't have to be the whole New Year's thing. It could be any day at all that you want to just see where you're at. It's how you measure and it's how you get to your end goal, whatever that end goal happens to be. You have to at some point check in and see how things are going, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you never look at how things are going, it's very hard to assess where you are and what else you need to do or what needs to happen, right, for you to achieve your goals.
Yeah,
So it's a huge part of productivity and just being effective and efficient in what you do.
for sure. Yeah. So, in your mind, is there a difference between reflection and evaluation, or are they sort of the same thing?
I consider them pretty much the same thing.
Okay.
Evaluation to me, it sounds a little bit more boring. So I
Mm-hmm.
prefer to call it reflection, and it's really part of the same process. It's really just looking at how are things going, and
Yeah.
is this actually going in the right direction that I want it to go? That's the gist of it.
Yeah. Evaluation to me feels more like analytical. Like, let's sit down and look
Hmm.
at our numbers and how did we get
Yeah,
to these and what was our conversion rate and, how many
yeah,
leads
yeah,
and that kind of stuff. And I
yeah.
always think of reflection more as like one of your reflection questions could even be like, was I who I wanted to be this week?
Exactly.
It doesn't
Hmm.
have to be like, did
And
we
we'll get
reach
into
the
the
goal? Did
whole,
we hit the
yeah,
numbers?
we'll get into the whole micro and macro, I'm sure, but that's how I view it. The micro part is that analytical piece of
Mm-hmm.
like numbers and like the stats and all of that, the detailed stuff. Whereas the macro view is more of what did my gut say? Did I
Mm-hmm.
actually feel like this was the right choice? Because sometimes those two don't add up,
Totally. Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. And so, do you recommend having a reflection routine in like several different areas of your life? Like for today, we're talking about business because that's what this podcast is about. But is it also helpful to have a couple questions that you ask yourself periodically about your romantic relationships, your friendships, your health, things like that? Do you do that?
Oh, absolutely. But here's my answer to that is that I teach basically holistic productivity. So I help a lot of small business owners. And for a lot of small business owner, their life and their business is one and the same,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's because it's very hard to draw a straight line, and divide the two.
Mm-hmm.
So like my business is a lifestyle business, for example. And so for me to try and separate the two areas would be very difficult.
Yeah.
So I prefer to look at the whole status quo of somebody's life when I help them, because like if nobody's getting any sleep, there's very little that I can do in order to help you get more productive, right? Like we first have to fix a few basic things that need to be in place, right?
Right.
So it's very important to look at what's going on outside of work too, because so often what affects us at work actually has nothing to do with work at all. It might
Hmm.
be something going on at home, or maybe if you're not productive at work, well, maybe you're a caretaker, or maybe you have something else going on that's taking your time, right? So it's really important to look at everything that's happening to get a full picture view, kind of like the whole debit and credit idea, right? You can't just look at the assets, you also have to look at the debt, right? You have to see what's going on everywhere to figure out what the solution is.
Yeah. And I feel like that's even more important for entrepreneurs than
Oh yeah.
people working like a 9 to 5 job. I feel like it was so much easier to like segment things when
Hmm.
I left the house and went to work. And then I came back from work to the house. And it was like when you were at work, everybody knew you were at work, right? So no one called you because they knew you were at work.
Yeah.
No one asked you, like, hey, can you go pick the kids up at noon because they're sick
Yeah.
in the middle of the
Yeah.
day because they knew you were at work. Like, it's much harder, I find, to keep those boundaries and like keep business and life separate now that I
Oh,
am
it's so hard.
self-employed.
It's so hard. It's so hard. It's sometimes impossible, especially with so many people now working remotely. You know,
Mhm.
like I work remotely. I've worked from home for over 10 years. And I work on the road a lot as well. And like, keeping distractions out and keeping the boundaries, it's extremely difficult.
Yeah.
Extremely difficult. Yeah.
Yeah,
But that's also a big part of it, because if you have other things tugging at your attention, it's very hard to get things done.
for sure. So I know productivity is your jam, which is great because I mean, depends on the day, but some days not my jam. How
It
does
happens.
having a reflection routine tie into being more productive? Like, how does having a reflection routine make you more productive?
Yeah, it's really how you assess where you are, and it's how you grab the learning and avoid mistakes in the future. So
Mm.
just to give you a brief overview, in project management, basically, whenever you're trying to do something, there's four stages to that, right? There is the planning process that comes first. Then we have pre-production, we have production, and post-production. That's how it works in all content creation. That's how it works in pretty much any industry. And that fourth stage, the post-production, is really for learning and figuring out, well, what actually happened here? Did this project go the way it was supposed to go? Did we, overspend? Were the resources utilized in the right way? And what happens is a lot of people skip a lot of these stages, right? They
Mhm.
jump straight into the action, they do the stuff, they never take the time to plan, they never take the time to look and analyze and, reflect and see what actually happened. And so what they do is they go over budget, they go using up resources that they don't have, and that whole cycle is sort of lost on them, right? And so
Yeah.
when you actually follow all of those steps and actually learn and you understand project management, then you realize how life-changing that is, because you understand when a project is actually wrapped. And that's how we, close and keep things neat and organized and tidy. And so that fourth stage is so, so important, because that's when you learn basically, like, well, what mistakes did I make here? And how can I avoid them the next time around? So if you never go through that process, you never learn from your mistakes, and then you just keep repeating them and repeating them. So when you understand project management, when you understand how systems and operations and all that stuff works, all of that becomes so seamless, and you just tighten up every single time you complete a project. You tighten up that cycle even more and more and more. And that in turn makes you more efficient every single time you do something, right? So it's a compounding effect. And I know it's hard to give sort of a bird's eye view of it, but it truly is life-changing because it applies in everything, in your life.
Yeah. Yeah. And I
Yeah,
think it's going to save you time, but it's also going to save you
absolutely.
your own energy. It's going to save you
Hmm.
money. Like, as you're talking about that, I'm thinking when I was new in business and I was a
Hmm.
dating coach and I started running Facebook ads to this free webinar I was doing. And my Facebook ads were amazing because I had like tons of people signing up for the webinar. I mean, I had like probably 250 people signing up for each webinar. And then I had probably like 20 people who actually showed up to the webinar. And then I
Mhm.
usually had like zero, maybe one person who converted to a paying client. But
Yeah.
never in that process did I stop to be like, okay, this is great that people are signing up, but
Mhm.
is that the goal? And are people signing, like, are they the right people
Yeah.
signing up? Right. So without
Mhm.
that reflection piece, this is just the only example I could think of.
Yeah.
Without that
Yeah.
reflection piece, I just kept putting money into those Facebook ads and
Yep.
doing those webinars over and over again
Yeah.
without, like, I feel
Exactly.
like if I would have stopped and had some sort of structured evaluation or reflection of like, is this really getting us to the goal? I could have saved
Mhm.
myself time and money.
Oh, absolutely. And that's actually a great example. It's that whole pause that you need to have to just say, well, wait a minute, is this actually working?
Yeah.
Like I ran a personal example. I mean, I ran a Facebook group for over 5 years, had a ton of people in there, ton of people signing up. Did they convert? Nope. But I kept running it for a bit. And I'm like, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what I mean? Like I could have stopped and reflected even more, So even I have to check myself sometimes. Sometimes we just get into a habit of doing something and we don't ever pause to actually ask ourselves, is it actually working or not? But that is such a powerful thing to do. It
Yeah.
really is.
Yeah. Especially, I think when you're newer in entrepreneurship and you're not really confident in your own ability to make decisions about your business. So there's all of these messages coming from everywhere, like all these
Yeah.
coaches and companies
Who do
and
you listen
ads
to?
and things of all the things that you need. And
Hmm.
so you just do them because some expert says that's what you need to do and
Yeah.
never stop to be like, is this actually like what I want to do? Is this
Yeah.
working for me?
Well, and that's what it really means, right? To have true sovereignty in your business and to start becoming more confident as a leader. It's like, well, wait a minute, I'm running this. What do I need to do? What are my goals? And is this something that I actually need to put time and energy into? Because we all have limited time, energy, resources, money, whatever it might be. And we really want to be smart about how we spend it because then we can do more good, right? So yeah, it's
Yeah.
a huge part of becoming successful.
Yeah. It also makes me think of that analogy, and I can't remember how it actually goes because I screw these things up all the time, but something about continuing to hit yourself in the head with a hammer, even though it
Yeah.
hurts. Like
Yeah.
arguments that we have with our spouse that go totally off the rails. And then the next argument we have, it goes off the rails again because we didn't stop to be like, where did that go wrong? Like, is there something I
Yeah.
could have done differently there? Or we
Yeah.
scream at our kids, or we, behave in a way as a parent that we're like, I don't love how that felt. But then we do it again tomorrow because we didn't take the time to stop and reflect of like, was there a point I could have stopped and turned that around?
Yeah, and that's exactly why it's so powerful to learn project management and learning those phases because then you apply that to every single part of your life. And all of a sudden, you keep learning, like, oh, I'm not going to do that again. I'm not going to do that again. And you get so much better, so much faster. And then, of course, it compounds right in all areas of your life, and you just accelerate.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, talk to us a little bit more. We touched on this about like reflecting on a macro level and a micro level, but what does that mean and what does that actually look like in practice?
Yeah. So if we start big picture, that would be the macro level, right? So a good example would be annual, planning or an annual review or doing something like that, where you're looking at the big picture of where am I going? Is this business, talking to the right customers? Do I want to, tweak my offers? Am I hitting the right targets and all of that? Like big picture of where's the train going, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also the micro level, which is that small step continuous improvement, and that's what you do in the smaller systems and the details of the projects every
Mm-hmm.
single time you complete a project. So there's like the smaller engine running, and there's like the bigger engine running, and
Okay.
both of them kind of have to harmonize.
Okay.
Yeah,
And so
it's a
do
lot
you,
easier to make adjustments to like detailed, smaller things, like smaller, right? Rather than to go, oh, well, my whole life is a mess. Like I need to completely switch direction. Like that feels really big, right? But it is also important to make sure that they match up. Does that make
yeah.
sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. So do you recommend doing reflections more frequently on the micro level than the macro level, or are both equally important?
Yeah, it's interesting because I actually have a system that I teach that actually does both. It has components of both the micro and the macro. So I actually do them together in one routine on Mondays. And that's basically what I teach because I feel like having both is so important. And you kind of can't have one without the other because then you have that misalignment.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes I think we get so focused on the micro that
Hmm.
we continue to move in a direction that we don't actually want to be moving in anymore. Like maybe
Yeah.
that was your goal at the beginning of the year or when you started this business or at the beginning of quarter one. And
Yeah.
so now you're just so focused on the micros. I knew
Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
wrong as it came out of my mouth, focused on the micros. And then you get to this point that's like, if you never stop and look back at the macro of like, is this still actually what I want?
Hmm.
Maybe
Yeah.
it's not.
Absolutely. No, it's so true because if you are like a traditional micro level person, sort of analytical, maybe left brainer, like you're used to focusing on details and you like analyzing and you like all that stuff. But then it's really, really hard sometimes to pull your head out of the sand and go, well, wait a minute, am I actually going in the right direction? Because
Mm-hmm.
you don't see the big picture as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you don't notice if you're off by a couple of degrees. And then
Right.
all over time, all of a sudden now the distance between you and your goals is so far that you've gotten way off track, right? So regular reflection lets you check in with yourself to make sure that you can actually course correct. And similarly, like on the macro side, like if you're a big picture thinker, if you're creative, right brain or visionary, like that type of person, sometimes you have a hard time looking at the smaller details because
Mm-hmm.
that's not really where your forte is. And then you kind of miss all of those details that are so important in order to button things up,
Right.
to make sure you stay on track, right? And not, overspend or commit to too many things and all of that. So it's really, really important that we have this balance between both of them. And that if you are leaning more, one over the other, like I'm for sure somewhere on the left, but more leaning right versus right leaning left. Like if you have a certain strength, it's really important that you hone your skills on the opposite side of that so
Yeah.
that you can have that balance. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a really great point. And while you're saying that, I'm thinking not just about like right brain people and left brain people or like type A or whatever you want to call them, but I
Hmm.
feel like so I was diagnosed with ADHD last year when I was 41. And prior to that, I feel like I tried so many different methods to do exactly what you're talking about. Like, oh, I have
Yeah.
this planner, excuse my cat's tail. Oh, I have this planner that's like has all these steps for planning out the beginning of your year. I got this planner that's broken into these quarters. There's like a made like a long running joke in the ADHD community about how many unused planners we own, and it's not
Yeah.
wrong.
Right.
So, what are your recommendations? Like, if people are listening to this and they're like, okay, that sounds great, but I've tried to make myself do that before and it doesn't work for me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's productivity is so personal, right? And that's the thing to realize is like, yes, there are suggestions out there everywhere, but you really have to figure out your own system within that. And you can take bits and pieces of what works for other people, but just making that your own because we all work differently. We all have different preferences, different backgrounds, different learning styles and all sorts of things that we're dealing with. And so it's really, really important to tailor something that works for you. And it's just a matter of figuring out how you best work, when do you best work? Like you said, you're maybe not a morning person. Like, that's okay. Like, let's
Mm-hmm.
not try to fight that. Let's try and work with it and make it
Right.
easy. You know what I mean? Like, you don't have to change yourself. You have to change the system that fits, to fit you,
Yeah.
you know? It's there's no one size fits all system. It just doesn't work. We are all two different people, and that's
Mm-hmm.
great. We should
Mm-hmm.
be different. But yeah, it really comes down to figuring out like your learning style, when you work best, what resources do you need, and all of that. And it just takes a bit of tweaking to figure out.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah.
I love that idea because I think one of my I won't get on the soapbox because everyone's heard it already, but like one of my biggest pet peeves in the entrepreneurial world is this idea of like we should all be doing it the same way. And because it worked for her,
Mhm.
she can, pay her $10,000. She'll tell you exactly how she did it. You do exactly what she did, and it'll work for you too. And so
Yeah.
many people are wasting their time and money learning how Susie did it, and then they
Yeah.
do it exactly how Susie did it. It doesn't work for them, or they can't
No.
get themselves to do it exactly how Susie did it. And then they're like, what the hell's wrong with me? Right. So
Yeah.
I
No.
love that
Yeah.
idea of like, who I was thinking about this the other day. I was like, who says we have to start working at 9 or
Yeah. No.
whenever you
Your
start
business, you
working?
make the rules.
Right. And stop working at 5. Like maybe I want to start working at 5.
I
I
don't work
don't
on
actually,
Mondays.
but
I don't work on Mondays.
exactly.
I don't want to. And that's my process that I teach. It's called Mindful Monday Mapping. It's because I didn't want to go into, this avalanche of things on a Monday and feel like I was drowning in tasks and to-dos. So I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to work on Mondays. That's
Yeah.
just the way it is. And I get my full weekend and I have a nice slow day on Mondays. I just reserve it for some admin work and my reflection routine and all of that. And that's it. And
That's
and
brilliant.
you get to make those rules. There's,
Mm-hmm.
especially in this, I mean, maybe back in the day it was different, right? But this is a brave new world. We have so many opportunities now working online and remotely that we didn't have. And if you're running your own business, it's your choice. Like you can make it whatever you want. And then realizing that you're a unique person with unique needs. And
Mm-hmm.
let's figure out what systems you need to support that rather than you trying to fit into something that already exists. That just doesn't work.
Yeah. Oh, you're speaking to my heart. So if
There's hope.
people, I know, right? Just keep listening to us. Just listen to me and Caroline, nobody else. So if people are listening to this and they're like, I don't really have a reflection routine, maybe this is something I should start. What's the like, are there a couple actionable steps people can take today to kind of move in this direction?
Yeah, yeah. I think the easiest question to just ask yourself on a regular basis and just make that a habit, maybe once a week, maybe once a year, whatever you feels right for you. But like, am I doing what I love and is this going in the right direction? And what proof do I have that that's correct?
Mm,
Like, that's a simple place to start, right? And then if you want to get into more of it, the more you reflect, the more you take time to do these things, the better things go for you because then you realize like, oh no, it's not going into the right area here. Let me course correct. Let me course correct. And when you start course correcting, regularly, you'll find that the line between you and your goal becomes a lot straighter than otherwise it's very swirly, right?
yeah.
So the more you course correct, the more of a shortcut you get to achieve your goals. And I love that because
Mm-hmm.
I am here to do as much good in the world as I possibly can. I want to make a really big impact. I want to give back. I have a lot of things I want to accomplish, and I do not want to waste my time.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to get there as fast as possible and still feel good and not have to sacrifice my own sanity, my time, my family time, my travel, any of that. Like it should all work for me,
Yeah.
not in spite of me.
I love the idea of just starting out with like one or two very basic questions. And then
Yeah.
you can add to that. You can tweak those questions, right? Like we're not all going to have the same questions. For some people, it's going to be really important that they ask themselves every day or every week, like, was I who God created me to be today? Right. Other people are never going to
Yep.
ask themselves that question because they have
Yep.
different values. So, you
Exactly.
know, allowing yourself that space to change the questions, to add questions, to take questions away. It doesn't always have to be the same.
No, not at all. Like I obviously have sets of questions that I teach that are great starting points, but I encourage people to take them and tweak them because those were, meant for me. That's how
Yeah.
I started to learn and started to do this, right? And so I tailored them based on my own blind spots, based on what I needed to check myself on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and as you start doing this more and more, you start to learn where your blind spots are. And then you
Mm-hmm.
have those control questions to check yourself along the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So really just start.
Oh, yeah. Just start.
That's
One
the bottom
question is
line.
all you need.
Just
Yeah.
start.
That's all you need.
And I feel like it helps me when I'm trying to create a routine like this. Maybe this will help someone else if they have a brain like mine. God help them if they do. But like I would always forget to take my medication every day. And so I started keeping my medication instead of in the medicine cabinet, I keep it in the freaking cereal cabinet because I don't eat cereal. I eat yogurt with granola, but the granola is in the cereal cabinet.
There you
Welcome to
go.
my
Yeah.
brain. And so I eat that every single day. So
Hmm.
there's no way I'm ever going to forget the medication that's in that cupboard, right? So like think of something that you do every day, whether it's walk your dog or take a
Yeah.
shit, or I mean, I hope you do that every day, but maybe you don't, and it's okay. Or like call your mom or whatever the thing is that you do, and
Yeah.
make that the time that you ask yourself the question.
hmm So
So then
yeah,
that time's already
exactly.
built in.
Yeah, it's already built in. And like what you just said is a perfect like summary of like how you curate your environment for success, right?
Yeah.
And that's a big part of productivity too. It's like, well, maybe the medication needs to be in a different place because that's where you're not going to forget it. Like there's ways where we can set up ourselves for success. And that's also very personal.
Yeah.
So that's something too that comes out of that reflection routine. You learn so much about yourself and how you do things. Like for the longest time, I had a hard time, getting out and walking regularly
Mm-hmm.
because, the weather and this and that, all sorts of excuses. But I realized that if I just put my shoes by the door, that is the cue for me to like, oh yeah, that's right. I
Mm-hmm.
remember I have to go for a walk today. Such a small thing, but made all the difference.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
That's really, really good. So, if people want to connect with you further, if they want to learn more about the awesomeness that you do and how you can help them be more productive and organized, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
By far, my website would be the best place. It's theswedishorganizer.com. So easy to find, and emails to hello@theswedishorganizer.com. And yeah, I have a ton of resources online. So there's plenty there to get started with. And like I said,
Awesome.
it just doesn't have to be difficult too. Even just one or two questions of, hey, am I doing what I'm meant to do? Am
Yeah.
I feeling okay today? Um, what went right about this situation? What went wrong about this? I mean, small, simple questions. That's all you need to get started, and you can figure out like as you go how to, best focus your attention. But it really is the one of the most powerful things you can do is to check in with yourself regularly.
Yeah, for sure. That's
hmm
brilliant. I will put your website in the show notes so people can click on there and go check out your resources and all the cool stuff that you're up to. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This was really, really good.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited. You can tell I'm passionate about reflection routine and getting more people to work in a better, more relaxing way. So,
Yeah, it's such an
yeah,
important
I'm excited for
conversation.
that.
So I hope the people that are listening will connect with you.
I hope so. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Powerful Woman Rising podcast. I love to hear that you guys are enjoying this podcast as much as I am enjoying making it. So if you have not already left a review, I would love for you to do that if you are listening on iTunes or on YouTube. Reviews can be left both places. If you want, you can also reach out to me on Instagram at Powerful Women Rising, and I would love to hear your thoughts on the podcast. If there's topics you'd like me to cover, if there are amazing experts that you'd like me to interview, I just love to connect with you guys. So definitely reach out and be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss another episode. Talk to you next week.